John Pontius here at the Whitley County Agricultural Museum on September 8th, 2009, here with Lynn Klingaman. And we're going to take a look at the museum and have Lynn tell us something about it. How did this get started?
This was started, to give a little history on this, this last summer, or 2009, was the 24th year of our antique tractor display that was here at the 4-H grounds. And then this kind of progressed over the years, and several years ago we began talking about the possibility of a museum. And Galen Wilkinson pushed this along with myself, and we ended up had members that donated money and so on to get the thing started, and eventually we got, if I recall correctly, we had 3 grants, and that gave us money enough to complete what you see here today. Now, there was many donations made, either in labor or money or materials.
A lot of enthusiasm, right?
Yes. And our intent here was to have all Whitley County items, and they may be donated or loaned. And our objectivity was to create a museum of Whitley County agricultural life, and we have changed the center theme here as we went along. 2 years ago we had just a general display. Last year we had corn oriented display
For the fair.
for the fair,
Yeah.
and kept that up until the fair this year. And then we changed and went to small grains. And
Okay.
next year we'll change to some other central theme here. And
Now, you were president of the board?
to start with, I was vice president
Okay.
of the board. Then I served a year that way. Then I was elected president of the board, and I served on that. And then last year I relinquished this because of my health problems,
Okay.
because I didn't think that I was capable of doing what I think I should do to be a president.
Okay. Where did any one person make a large contribution here to start out with?
There were several people that had given $5,000, and several that gave 1,000, and then there were many that was 50, 100, 200,
How about
500.
how about the antique stuff? Did any one or two people?
Galen Wilkinson was a major contributor on most of the primitive stuff on the walls.
And is he he lives in Whitley County?
Yes.
Is he a farmer?
Yes.
Okay.
And then Pauline Scott done the kitchen thing here. It was and we'll get into that here
Okay.
at a later date. And various other people donated things.
And are there do children come and see this?
We have had approximately 1,000 children has been through here, school kids, that at various times in the last 2 years. And
Okay.
it seems to be fairly popular.
Okay. Now, do they come and they kind of make a tour of the bays here?
Yes.
And so let's take a look at some of the booths or the bays here and tell us about them. Now, this is an old-time kitchen, right?
This would be a typical kitchen in the 1900s to up to World War II or shortly after. But as you can see, we have the old kitchen sink and a cistern pump and the old time stove and your cupboards. Everybody today has built-in cupboards. At that time span they were movable cupboards, and you have the canning supplies here, and we have the stuff labeled and a typical table set up. And then over here your wash basin and shaving mug and a stove to heat water on, wash tubs, sewing machine, and your ironing board with the iron that was heated on the stove. It wasn't like electric iron today.
Okay, and the next booth here, what do we have here?
This booth here is on candle making by hand, and they have different molds, and candle wax is heated, and you can have dipped candles like this that they simply dip in here, let it cool, dip it in again and again and again till you get a candle. Or you can have molded candles. Now that's stuck fast, but you have different molds for candles.
And certain individuals at each booth come and show the children.
Yeah.
And who does this?
Ned Yingst
Okay.
does.
And do the children get to practice?
They can actually dip.
Okay.
You know.
And I forgot to ask you, who is the person that shows the kitchen?
Pauline Scott.
Pauline Scott, okay. And she's dressed like an old timer, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and the next we have here quilting and sewing.
This is quilting and sewing.
And what is this?
This is, I'll step over it. Alright, we have a quilt here. This quilt will be made, and hopefully next year this will be, the purpose of this was to be made as a money-making project for the museum, and it will be either raffled or auctioned
Okay.
next year.
Okay, and you have an old sewing machine?
Yes.
That they demonstrate with too?
Yes. Yeah, this is a pedal sewing machine.
Okay. And who are the people that show this?
This is a varied group.
Okay.
It could be several different women.
Well, were
So I
the
don't have-
Burnsworth family?
Burnsworth had brought in, I believe this
Okay.
is their sewing machine,
Okay.
and I don't have names for everything,
Okay.
for people.
And here is the laundry display, the old-time laundry. And looks like we have a really old 1910 washing machine
Yeah.
here. It's called a vacuum washer.
Now
Did
this
you-
is taken care of by Bill Klinke.
Okay.
And
Did you ever use a washer like this?
I've done that, and I've never used one like this. My mother had a wash machine with electric motor on it.
Okay.
I said one time she had a Maytag with a gas engine on, but I don't remember that.
Okay.
And she had the same wash machine, but it had been changed over to electric motor.
Okay.
But I've emptied many tubs of water, and she had an outfit about like that back there with the 2 tubs on that you rinse your clothes out after they were washed.
What about when, say, your grandfathers and grandmother, when they wanted to take a bath? They had no running water or bathtub, did they?
Well, you heated the water on the stove, took a bath in a tub like this,
Okay.
and that was fairly common.
And there was
Use the wash tub. Now, can you imagine fitting in a wash tub?
where would the wash tub be? Would it
Well,
be
it's sitting on the kitchen floor.
on the kitchen
Yeah.
floor? Okay.
Yeah.
And would more than one person use the water?
Well, we never did.
Okay.
We changed water, but
Okay.
some people reused the water, you know.
Okay. Okay.
But my mother was always pretty particular on that.
Okay.
We changed water. Said, I don't want to wash in your crud.
Right. Well, now we have the dairy and milk display. And who usually does this?
Dave Schilling and his wife Sheila.
Who grew up on a dairy
Yes.
farm, I assume.
Yeah.
And what is this?
All right, that's a surge milker that was quite popular 25, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. As surge milker, there was various other milking machines also, but surge was quite popular.
Now, were they electric?
Yeah, they had a
Okay.
electric motor, run a vacuum pump, and you had a line that went above the cows that you could plug your hose in to get
Okay.
vacuum.
And it kind of squeezes and
Yeah.
brings some milk out.
Yeah. It
Okay.
had a pulsator that replicated your, operated the vacuum to make it like you was milking by hand almost.
Yes. But they couldn't come along until electricity, right?
Well, there was some very early ones that had gasoline engines ran a vacuum pump. But because I just seen one here a week ago in Portland, that was a diesel valve gas engine. A diesel valve made probably a large percentage of the cream separators.
Okay.
Yeah, so they did have gas powered ones.
So when did electricity come, say, on your farm?
Well, we got electricity in about 1938 or 39.
Okay.
And of course, immediately we changed over to electric motors and lights and
Big
so on.
change.
Yes,
Major change. Running water and
running water.
inside.
Now before that, you had to go out the well and pump a bucket of water and carry it in the house or
Yeah.
carry it to the livestock. And livestock could drink 9 million bucketfuls in a week, it
Yes.
seemed like.
Yes. Okay, next we have the one-room school. And who is the school marm here?
Beth Sinkerfoos is a school.
And what does she do here?
Well, she attempts to replicate the way schools was around the turn of the century. And
Okay.
one-room schools, and she does a very good job on this. And if you
Do the students ever come and sit here?
yes, yeah, when we
Okay.
have kids come in here, they actually come here, sit down, and she teaches a class for about 20 minutes.
Okay.
And if you notice the signs that she has around here, and discipline was half of the thing of going to school.
Okay.
And when she comes here, she tells the kid, my name is Miss Elizabeth,
Okay.
and, or Miss Beth, I mean, and so on. And discipline was rather strict.
Okay.
And
Now, how did, for example, did you get to school?
well, on one-room schools, most people just simply walked. because that would be on every couple miles
Okay.
would be a one-room school.
Did you go to a one-room school?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
My father did.
Okay.
And, my father went to the school up there that is right there north of Goose Lake.
Okay.
And it's still standing.
Okay. And over here is a map, and if I remember right, it's a map with about 1873.
Correct.
And the map has every owner, the name of every owner of a farm at that time.
At that time span.
And it's a very rare map. And I noticed that at that time, the rivers were not straightened out. And so, like on a farm I happen to live on, a big dip.
Yeah.
And so that made it complicated sometimes for farming back then, I suppose.
The reason for that, the ditches at that time span generally followed a natural course. And then they were hand dug. So you followed where it had the least digging to do. Today with modern excavators and cranes, you can straighten these out and have nice straight ditches. But at that time, well, if you was digging by hand, you didn't want to dig big straight lines, and
Yeah.
that took much more work.
Okay.
Threshing from earlier times through the 1950s.
And so this is the earliest.
This is the earliest. This is what they call a winnower, that you scooped up grain and tossed it up into the air and let the wind blow the chaff away from it. And here was a straw carrier and a cart to haul small grain in. And then here we have a threshing floor. That's your small grain, and you beat the heads with this and would knock the grain down, then you could pick that floor up and scoop the grain up.
So they probably did this in a barn?
In a barn, yeah.
Okay. Now this had to be maybe 1850?
That'd be in the 1800s,
Yeah.
1850.
And,
Labor intensive.
and then where is the next stage?
Now, we had on planting wheat or small grains, we started out here with the in-gate seeder. That was simply a double wagon box with a sprocket and a whirligig thing on the back that scattered the grain and pulled by horses.
Okay. And you're talking about wheat?
Wheat or oats, and
Okay.
on occasion barley and rye.
Okay. And we have here a corn planter?
We have, this is all small grain.
Small grain, okay.
Was a one-horse drill. We have 3 different styles here that you can, and this is a later one, that you could actually sow wheat or rye in standing corn in the fall, because you shuck corn by hand, which took a long period of time to do. So you could actually go plant your wheat.
So
in the
it's
standing
small
corn.
enough it could go
Go
between the
the
rows?
corn rows.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this was?
This could have been before 1900. This could have been up to 1950.
Okay. Okay.
I've actually planted wheat with an outfit just exactly like that.
Farmers worked harder back then,
Yeah.
didn't they?
Yeah, but farmers didn't farm 3,000 acres.
Okay.
And
So
then
this
here's a grain drill. Would have been used like from 1900 to 1950 or
Okay.
so. Steel-wheeled 10-hole grain drills.
And this would be pulled by a tractor?
This would be pulled by a team of horses.
A team of horses?
Yeah.
And over here, we need to go this way.
I'll catch this stuff on the next.
Okay, and we have a seed cleaner and screen.
Yeah.
This is what they use to save seed for the next year, right?
Yeah. The seed was put in here, was hand cranked, and you had various screens depending on the commodity to take out the big particles and the little particles.
Okay. Now, farmers no longer save seeds, do they?
No.
So
This is
the seeds don't.
most seed today is done commercially.
Okay, and they wouldn't grow because if they tried to save them, or?
Well, due to modern technology, like corn is hybrid corn and it cannot be replanted.
Okay.
And the same way with, in the last few years, they've had soybeans and even wheat that is genetically modified to allow you to spray for certain weeds without killing the commodity.
Okay. So farmers then have to buy their seed every
Right,
year.
it's done commercially.
Now, what do we have here?
Let's jump back here.
Okay.
Let's come this way.
Okay, let's go back this way.
In harvesting grain.
What do you call this?
Grain was harvested for centuries with a sickle like this.
Yeah.
They all hand labor. And they use a cradle. That would be like this.
So they pick up the grain with the stalk that way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cut it off, and then that give you.
Oh, it can cut too?
Yeah, that give you a small bundle here. Then those bundles was tied up
And
so
what?
you could chop it.
And then what would they do?
Then this
They put it in shocks.
this would be in shocks
Okay.
so that the grain could dry.
Okay.
And then later they came out with these reaper that was drawn by horses, and this would cut it and sweep it off here in bunches. Then you had to hand tie it and shock it.
Okay, so that saved time and effort.
Yeah. Then
And
we progressed on to a binder here.
this is called a binder.
Yeah.
Now, why is it called a binder?
Well, because it cut the wheat, ran it up here, and it actually tied it up in bundles.
Okay.
Right
Would
here.
it be tied with like binder
With twine, yes.
Okay.
With twine. They dropped onto this, and you carry 5 or 6 bundles here and drop it, and that made it so you had less walking to do when you shocked it.
Okay. And so when it was shocked and sitting there a while, you would go to
The bundles looked like this, and they were set up like that, and generally 9 bundles to a shock, and the 9th one was put on top as a cap.
the cap sheet,
Yeah,
and then you would bring out the threshing machine, right?
that's right. Then this would be loaded on wagons when they decided to get ready to harvest, and they had a threshing machine that was driven by a tractor. It could be, in earlier times, steam engine, and then later, farm tractors.
Now, would they have to have, one person couldn't do this, could they?
No, this would be as a group of people called a threshing ring, and you would have 10 or 15 people go from farm to farm to farm.
Okay.
And
Sometimes now every farmer then didn't have a threshing machine.
no, this would be a threshing ring. And you'd have a threshing machine and something to power with in each community. And then, of course, you had a large group of people, and so the women would go together and cook a noon meal. And you generally started maybe 10 o'clock in the morning or so, depending on the humidity and the weather, and then run till evening.
Okay, and would there be a settle up time afterwards?
That would be the normal procedure was to charge by the bushel on threshing.
Okay.
So if you had 200 bushel and I had 300 bushel, you know, I paid more than you did.
For the labor and everything.
Yeah, for the
okay.
labor. And the threshing, as I recall, the actual people that worked there, other than the guy that owned the thresh machine and the tractor, worked for each other with no wages, because you helped me and I helped you.
Okay.
And only the thresher man got paid for owning the machine and supplying the power.
Now, I suppose kids would help. They would
Yeah.
kind of help with the shocking and picking the
Yes.
up. And it was quite sometimes I assume it was kind of a fun time to all get together like
Well,
that.
yeah, it was a
Have a good
community
meal.
work project.
Okay. And so eventually a combine took over, and we have a combine here.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, let's talk about tractors here. What is this?
All right, this is a Romney 6 that was built by the Romney Company in LaPorte, Indiana, and these were manufactured in 1931. And then I think in 32, Romney sold out to Alice Chalmers.
Okay.
And so that was the end of the Romney line.
When did the tractors first come to Whitley County, roughly?
There was steam engines here before the turn of the century, and I'm talking 1900. They would have been steam engines here in the 1880s, 1890s, and clear on up to World War II. And after World War II, well, prior to and after World War II was primarily tractors, but some places still ran steam engine.
Okay. Where now you lived on a farm, grew up on a farm?
Yes.
When did you get your first tractor, and what was it?
The first tractor my dad had was an F-14 International that was purchased through the OPA system during World War II. And he bought it in Whitley County here at a public auction, and you bid the tractor off, but you had your names in a bucket. And they pulled out a name, and if you wanted the tractor, you could go ahead and pay for it. If you didn't want it because it was too much money or something, then you could buy it. They'd pull another name, see? But generally that didn't happen because everybody wanted a tractor and get rid of them dang horses.
Okay. So how did they, part of the time, keep their horses while they had a tractor?
Yes. My dad had horses for probably 3 years after he bought a tractor. And we used a tractor for plowing and cultivating and combining. And then he planted corn with the horses because we had a horse corn planter. Then I think the last year we used a corn planter, the horse-drawn corn planter. We cut the tongue off and pulled it with the tractor.
Okay. This maybe was in the early 40s, or?
This would have been about 44, 45, 46 in that era. I think he got rid of the horses in 46.
Okay. Now, was it ever possible to trade your horses in for a tractor?
Yes. this was, Dad didn't do that, but I remember them talking about Craig Ballman's son in Huntington had, at the beginning of World War II, they had traded horses for tractors, and the story I've heard, they had almost 1,000 head of horses, and then World War II came along and they lucked out, they sold them to the Army.
Okay, very interesting.
So,
And later on, what were some of the tractors that you had on your farm?
well, we had the F-14, of course, then we bought a F-20 in about 1947, I believe, because I was a sophomore in high school, and Dad picked me up at Larwell, and he'd bought it down there with South Whitley, and after school he hauled me down there and I drove the tractor home, and home was up here by New Lake.
And what township was that?
That would have been Troy Township at that time.
Okay.
Today it's in the Troy, but
Okay.
at that time it was just Troy. They had Anna Township and Troy Township.
Okay, now I know at here at the fair, there are some very old tractors, mini tractors. What would be maybe one of the oldest? Was there something called a water boy or?
Oh, yes, Galen Wilkinson, this John Deere, well, they call them John Deere Waterloo boys, but Waterloo was a separate manufacturer and John Deere bought them out.
Okay.
And
they were both green.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And about
that would have been about
in the 20s.
Right around 1920.
Okay. We're back in, I suppose, the early. It was rare to have a tractor at that time, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. But maybe by 1930 there were quite a few more.
There was getting more and more tractors. And
Okay. And
they
what
came out with smaller tractors that were more adaptable instead of big old tractors. Like
Okay.
a Waterloo boy, you could not cultivate with it. It was just primarily a power unit on wheels, and you could plow with it or work ground. Then in the early 30s, John Deere and International and several other companies had tractors that were row crop tractors
And
that
was-
you could cultivate corn with.
was Ford one of them?
Fordson.
Fordson.
At that time. Yeah. And the actual Ford tractor, as we know it today, the 9N, 8N, 2N, was started in 1939.
Okay. So what do we have? Let's go and see. This is the combine that took the place of the thresher. Right.
Now this is a fairly late combine. This would have been in the early 60s. And the tractor that's on it was manufactured, I think, in 58 and up to about 1960.
So
And this was a 8-foot cut. And he was talking about what my dad did. Our first combine was also international, but only cut 42 inches.
and about when was that?
That would have been in 1947. It
Okay.
cut 42 inches, which is about like somebody going out here with a modern lawnmower to mow a field, you know.
Okay.
But it was much less time consuming than the threshing.
Okay. Okay. Over here we have a newer tractor.
After you combine, this tractor would have been about 1950. And after you combine, your straw fell on the ground and you could rake it up and then bale it up in. This particular baler was a round baler.
Okay, made round bales.
Made round bales and generally pulled with a small tractor like this.
Okay.
And the CA had foot clutch and a hand clutch because every time you went to kick out a bale, you had to stop. See, you had to stop forward travel. So that was the purpose of the hand clutch. The power takeoff still continued to run, but the tractor stopped moving.
Then the bale would kick out behind.
Yeah, yes.
Let's talk a little bit about how dangerous some of these this farm equipment can be. Now, I believe we had a neighbor at one time who was put his hand up to grab some straw or hay that was stuck, and his arm got caught, and they had to amputate his arm.
Well, these particular machines has got a bunch of belts that rolls this round bale, and the person you're talking about is Guy Jagger.
Right.
And I don't think they had to amputate his arm. I think that was already done by the machine. And
Okay.
clear up to his shoulder.
Okay.
But
Now,
lots of open chains, open drives, open V-belts. And I remember especially, we had a mounted corn picker, and you sat in there driving this, and right out here, just inches away from you, was open roller chains and gears and sprockets, but you sat in and drove like this, you didn't flop your arms around or nothing.
Okay. I imagine in some of the other equipment we've been looking at, there were accidents with them too.
Yes. And today, nearly everything is all shielded and covered and so on.
Well, you know, obviously it was a lot more work back then. There was a lot more pitching manure and shoveling
Handwork.
than handwork.
Lots of handwork.
Than farmers do now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you couldn't run out and get the skid loader, you know, you done it by hand.
and of course, a lot of people had big families, and that helped out.
Yeah.
Do you think it was in any way better back then than it is now?
Well, everybody talks about the good old days. However, most people today would not want to go back to the good old days.
Okay. Was there
There's
any
memories, good memories,
Okay.
but
Now,
the physical work was mind-boggling.
Now back then, you probably got to know your neighbors a little better back then,
Right.
didn't you?
Yeah, you worked together. My father made hay with his brother in Noble County. We worked back and forth, and he farmed, helped back and forth with Jim Waugh quite a little bit, and you would own this piece of machinery, and you would own this piece of machinery, and work together, you know.
Okay.
I know Dad had a good hay loader to load hay with, and my uncle didn't have a hay loader, so we'd load that. He lived in Noble County. The hay loader had steel wheels, so he'd load that thing up on the wagon and haul it up to his place and make hay for 3 or 4 days, and haul it back home and make hay at our place.
Okay.
And
They save money.
Yeah, and a major expenditure at that time was $400 or $500, where now people, you know, a modern combine is $250,000, and
Where would you go if you had questions about what to do on the farm? Some practice that you've heard about was for example, the county agent.
well, county agents was used extensively as
Okay.
modernization. Things came from Purdue University, and you could get pamphlets, or they would actually come out, and I know my dad built a double corn crib with overhead grain storage, and used Purdue plans on that. And my father-in-law, back in the 30s, long before I met him, they built a chicken house that was a Purdue plan, and this was done quite extensively.
Now,
you know, back in the 30s and 40s, And,
Who was the county agent back then?
well, the one I remember was B.V. Whitney.
Okay.
And
Was here a long time.
he was here a long time. And then later, of course, Val Slack.
Okay.
But
Did B.V. Whitney, as the county agent, did he organize any organizations for the farm?
well, I think he was quite instrumental in the 4-H fair here.
Okay.
And they had various meetings and seminars, I'll call them, and so on to
Were
help
there
farmers out.
the neighborhood organizations back then?
There was probably the threshing ring was the main thing that I know of.
Okay.
Now they would, at one time back in I believe in the 50s, there was the NEO was a farm.
NEO.
Yeah, it was a farm organization attempting to get prices up to a livable level.
Would you would have regular meetings?
NFO.
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 And were there?
National Farm Organization.
Okay.
And Whitley County was quite active in that for a number of years, and then that kind of died off because what happens if you're a grain farmer and I'm a livestock farmer, what's good for you is not good for me, and so they never really got organized because of the wide interest in all farming, but different interests, you know. And
Is there anything else here you would like to show us?
well, I would like to go back along the wall, and
Okay.
I'd like to talk about the mural up here a little bit.
Okay. Who did the mural?
Beth Darley from South Whitley done the mural. She done the actual painting, and we laid out from the early 1800s on your left and went progressive as you went down through here. And see, they were clearing the ground, then they were sawing logs, building buildings. Then over here there was lots of barns built around the turn of the century, 1880s to 1920s, but framed barns. And your farmstead's got, then we moved over here where he was picking corn with a mounted corn picker, and you had the Chevrolet car there on a gravel road and small bales. And then we progressed over here to a more modern farmstead and a bigger house, and then the combining and semis and grain bins and so on. Hold it. Antique woodworking tools. The little frame barn here was built by David Engel on a scale model, and he done this himself, similar to the frame barn in the mural. Then we have many kinds of tools here, and saws and planes and drill bits. Here was a drill that was used to make the mortise and tenon joints in a barn. You can set that on a beam here and bore your holes and chisel it out with a square chisel to make your mortise and tenon joints.
And
Yeah.
here we have log over here,
Yeah.
and
What I'm depicting here was sawing boards. This was an up and down saw operated by hand. And you generally, they call them a pit saw, one man up here and one man down below on a pit to operate this. Then this blade here is a modern mill similar to out here, Holmes. This piece came from Holmes Lumber Company as a bandsaw. Then this is a common circle sawmill.
This was later?
This is latest probably.
Okay.
And this would be, after that they had
Okay.
various sizes of these mills. And
Now, would farmers do a lot of this
there was
themselves?
my dad had a sawmill,
Excuse me.
and sawmills were quite common throughout Whitley County here, because Whitley County was all timbered and it was basically cleared and farmed.
And they used the wood to make the barns and
Barns and
houses,
fences and
fence posts.
fence posts and such as that.
Okay. What is this piece of wood here?
All right, this piece of wood here is, you can find out how old a tree is by counting the number of rings. That's in here. This tree happens to be somewhere around 76 years old.
Okay.
And I have a personal interest in this. The trees were about this tall, and they were on my dad's farm, and we moved them and put them out along the front of the house. And when I was a kid, you had to mow under them, and I hated mowing under them pine trees. But,
So this is a pine tree
yeah,
here.
this was a,
And
I
how
think-
tall are they now?
they are probably 35 feet tall.
Okay.
But one of them died here a couple years ago, and I cut this chunk out because it was easy to show the rings.
Okay. I see a sign here that says Cooper. What is a Cooper?
The Cooper made barrels,
Oh, okay.
and they had various tools here that would, like here, see, this would fit around, and you had tools that would cut this, and all of these are tapered, and you had various tools here to, here's bands that would hold your pieces together.
Were there companies that made barrels, or were
Yes.
it people,
Well,
individuals?
There was companies and individuals,
Okay.
small businesses.
What would they put in the barrels?
Why, years ago, they sold anything from whiskey to crackers
Okay.
in barrels. And
Okay.
I can remember the old store up at Etna had like Perfection crackers come in barrels.
So you had a general store kind of in
Yes.
Etna?
Yes. And you could buy a pound or 2 pound, they just scooped them up and weighed them. And,
Are there any stores like that in Etna now?
no,
I didn't think
No.
so. Okay, what do we have here? We have some pulleys.
these would have been various time spans on pulleys used in barns for pulling hay up on a track.
Yeah, okay.
And just a general display. Here's probably a fairly common pulley. And this is a very old one here, and it's been used quite a little bit. Here's for block and tackle. There's another barn pulley.
And what would this be used for?
This was to repair shoes. And you had different things that went on here.
Now that would be to put soles.
So you could put your shoe on there, then you could nail a new sole on.
Okay. Okay. Did you ever do that?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
It's almost a lost art today. But today, you run down and buy a new pair of shoes. When I grew up, you might have got a new pair of shoes till you outgrew them.
Okay.
But you'd re-sole them and repair the sides of them and so on.
Now what do we have here?
Alright. Okay. This is a foot warmer because most people slept in cold bedrooms. I mean, houses were not insulated, not heated in the upstairs, so you fill this with hot water and took it to bed with you.
Okay.
Or you could have a stone deal like this that you laid on the stove and done the same thing. It would warm it up, keep your feet warm for a while.
For a while, until you got to sleep, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, let's see, what else do we have here? We have, what is this?
Like that was a carbide light that you actually had acetylene in here and burnt with a little wick in there.
You had a flame there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Didn't make much light, but
You know, you might take that out to the barn and so you
Yeah.
could see.
yeah.
Okay. Now, what would be this
That
large
was
thing?
a grain scoop, and that would hold a half bushel.
So you could measure something.
Yeah, reasonably
Okay.
accurate, you know. And
Okay. Now, this is very interesting here. It says a cutter of some kind.
yeah, you used to cut up grain for, like corn stalks for cattle, and they lay your stalks of corn down there, chop them up in pieces for cattle.
Okay. Well, Lynn, thank you very much for
Right.
showing us the Agricultural Museum.
Okay.
We really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I am John Pontius, here at the Agricultural Museum of Whitley County with Lynn Klingaman on September the 8th, 2009, and for the Whitley County Oral History Project. And I wanted to ask Lynn what he did after high school.
After high school, I graduated from Larwell in 1949, and I farmed with my dad on a farm on the south edge of New Lake in Troy Township, Whitley County. And then the Korean conflict came along, and that started in 1950, and I had a deferment for 2 years. There was 1 year deferment, but I had 2 consecutive deferments. Then,
Why did you have this deferment?
because of farming,
Okay.
and then I went to apply for a 3rd deferment, and I was denied because they said that they never give anybody a 3rd year deferment.
Okay.
So I didn't want to be drafted, so I immediately went to Fort Wayne and checked out what the options was on joining the military.
Now, why didn't you want to be drafted?
Because theoretically you have no control over what your training would be or
Okay.
anything. And if you enlisted, you had some control over what schooling you could go to and so on, because that was part of the incentive to enlist.
And
So-
did you have something in mind that you really
Yes.
wanted to do?
I enjoyed shop work and welding, and so I signed up for welding school excuse me, at Aberdeen, Maryland. So when I was inducted, you went to Indianapolis and passed your physical, and if you passed the physical, you did not even get to come home. I went directly to Fort Custer, Michigan for 3 days to process and get your clothes and so on. I was shipped to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for basic training because I did not have time enough to get my schooling papers back. And
Now, was that basic training pretty rough?
the basic training was, I think the hardest thing was the lack of sleep. But as far as physical activity, it was easier when I was doing farming.
Okay, so you were ready for it in a way.
Because when I went in the military, I weighed 140 pounds, and in 8 weeks I weighed 165.
Okay, how did that come about?
Well, I was used to eating heavy
Okay.
and working hard, and I didn't work half as hard at basic as I did at home.
Okay.
So I gained weight.
Okay.
But
Now that involved probably a lot of marching.
a lot of marching, physical exercise, and a certain amount of, I'll call them harassment, in order to get you to do what I told you to do.
How long was
8
that?
weeks.
8 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then after that, in our 6th week of basic, we had schooling interviews. By that time I had my paperwork back for welding school, and so I took that with me during the schooling interview. And after the 8 weeks was over, I went by myself to Aberdeen, Maryland. And went
How did you get there?
by train.
By train, okay.
And I went to welding school, which was 12 weeks, and I already knew how to weld when I went there, but I done very well in the welding school. And in the 10th week, this was 12-week school, the 10th week I was asked to stay as a welding instructor.
Okay.
Well, they were still fighting like mad in Korea, so the decision was pretty easy.
Yes.
And I stayed at Aberdeen then for about 18 months as a welding instructor for vertical and overhead arc welding.
Now, what would the military need? Why would they need that?
Well, you had, just like, if you think of this as a big construction company, you have machines that break, frames break,
Okay.
various other things, and welding was in great demand. And
Okay.
even clear down to, I taught for part of this 2-week span. You covered, each instructor covered a 2-week period. And part of this period was actually showing students how to repair shell holes in tanks or armored vehicles.
Okay.
And there was a set procedure for that.
Okay.
But then I had about 13 months to go before I got out of the military, and I got orders to go to Europe. And I went to Europe, and my home base there was Verdun, France. And I was there one day, and they called out for roll call and said, "Hey, we need somebody to go to wheel vehicle school in Germany." "I'll go." So I went.
About what year was this?
This would have been in 1954.
Okay.
And so the next morning I was on the way to Houston, Germany to wheel vehicle school. So I spent 100 days in Germany and then returned back to Verdun, France.
What do you mean by wheel?
All right, that was general automotive repair on
Okay.
anything that had wheels on.
Okay.
Now, they had a track school also, but that would have been for track laying vehicles. That would have been dozers,
Okay.
tanks, and so on.
Okay.
And I went to the wheel vehicle school. The other thing I forgot to mention, when I was in Aberdeen as a welding instructor, you had to go to movie projection school and instruction school. That was a week long. Then each company had to have what they called a CBR man, and I was chosen to go to Fort Meade, Washington, Washington D.C. Fort Meade, Maryland. And you went to a 2-week school that was chemical, biological, and radiological warfare. And so then you came back and you were your company CBR man.
What was that?
chemical, biological,
Well,
radiological
what's a
warfare.
CBR man?
Well, that was just a
Oh, that-
person that was supposed to know what you're supposed to
Okay.
do
All right.
when these things occurred to you.
Okay.
But,
And how long were you doing that? And,
well, that was for the remainder of my time in Aberdeen.
Okay.
Then after I got overseas, that no longer applied.
okay.
It was on your records, but they didn't utilize that. But I was in Europe for a year, and I'd done a couple of weeks of traveling, and
Where?
in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Denmark, and back through Germany. And then part of my job in France, we've done quite a bit of traveling in the central portion of France to repair broken cross frames on 2.5-ton military trucks. So I did travel quite a bit when I was in Europe. And I returned home then October the 12th of 1955.
Was it a good experience? Like, did you learn things during your service that were helped you later on? And
Well, part of my occupation throughout my entire life was welding.
okay.
I farmed and welded, and I done millwright work on grain bins and grain setups for many farmers here in Whitley County area or surrounding areas.
So you had a farm and you had this other occupation.
Yeah, had two occupations.
How could you do that?
Long hours.
Okay. Was on your farm, was it your father's farm or another farm?
I started out with my father's farm, and then we farmed together till about 1966. Then I went on my own, and at the peak in about 78 or 79, I was farming about 800 tillable acres, basically by myself.
Did you have livestock?
I had livestock for a while, and I didn't like livestock too well, so I dropped that and went to grain farming totally.
Okay.
That gave me more time in the summertime to pursue this
I
grain
see.
handling systems. And
You would build grain bins?
yes,
Okay, metal grain bins.
metal grain bins.
Okay.
Yeah, I had many farmers here in Whitley County bought off of me. My largest customer was Gene Byers on 410 South Line Street, and
The elevator here,
Yeah.
grain elevator.
then I done a fair amount of work for Shively's out here east of town, and I built several grain bins out there, and
Just as an aside, I believe you did some grain bin work on our farm in Thorn Creek Township at one time.
yeah, and so I don't know, but I got interested in antique tractors and so on
Been a hobby.
probably 25 years ago or so, and I decided that if I was going to do something for a hobby, I enjoyed that, and I've been to many, many tractor shows. I've met many, many fine people, and it's been a good trip.
Do you have some old time, some antique tractors?
I have a couple at the present time. I had numerous tractors over the years that I liked, the lesser known tractors, and I stayed away from the popular brands pretty much because everybody had them. And I've had Sears Economy, Intercontinental, Custom, Huber, and of course Shepherd diesels, and had a Graham Bradley, and I don't know, several other lesser known makes, you know. And in the last few years I've sold off part of them. Last fall I had a auction and sold off most of the Shepherd stuff I had, but I kept some things because I gotta have something to aggravate myself with.
Okay, so you can work on.
Yeah.
Getting back earlier, when did your family arrive in Whitley County? Was it your father or your grandfather?
My grandfather, as near as I can, the information I have, came from Ohio, and they settled down here on the east side of Black Lake here in Whitley County.
Okay.
And I have some photos of them, and the one that sticks in my mind, they cleared ground down there to farm and burnt good, perfectly good walnut and oak logs and so on, just piled them and burn them, you know.
Just to get rid of them?
Just to get rid of them.
Okay.
And today they would be worth good money, you know.
Okay.
But at that time, hey, it was a tree. I got to get it out of the way so I can plant corn.
Okay.
And then they moved later up here on a farm, which Eugene Klingaman owns now.
That would be your first cousin?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can remember going back there in the 40s and seeing my grandparents. Now, I never knew my grandfather because he died a year after I was born. But my grandmother died in 1942.
So your father took over that farm?
Well, no, he farmed on his own.
Okay.
Other than that, my dad's brother farmed that.
Okay.
And my dad worked for Harry Kitson and lived down here east of Larwell on the north side of 30, the house that's up on the hill there where Larry Schumann owned.
Okay.
And then I had not started the school when we were living there. And then he went to work for Glenn Galloway up there on State Road 5. And I lived in a house there on the west side of 5 before it makes the crook going east. And we lived there, and I started school there. And then I was in the first grade. In the spring, my dad moved over to the farm on the south side of New Lake and started farming on his own. And I still went to Troy School. I just changed bus drivers. So I'd done my 8 years at Troy and then my 4 years at Larwell.
Okay, I have one last question. This is about cars and your family. Where was your first car?
The first car that I can remember that Dad had was a Model A Ford.
Okay, back in the 30s?
That would have been in the early 40s.
Early 40s.
And during World War II, he got in a wreck and wrecked it. And they chopped the back end of the car off. He got hit in the left rear quarter panel. And so they cut the car off and they bought a truck axle from the county highway garage down here. And we made that into a tractor of sorts. We called it the Hootenanny. And we used that for several years. And it was great for rotary hoeing corn or something because you could go fast with it. And I've hauled many, many loads of ear corn and so on with that because you could travel fast. And we hauled gravel and so on. But it was a homemade tractor. And that's actually the first motorized vehicle Dad had.
Okay.
But one other thing along that line, Dad had a corn shredder that was belt drive before we ever had a tractor to power with. And we powered that with an old Chevrolet car engine that you could buy a pulley that fit on the back of the transmission from Sears and Roebuck. And we had that engine on a trailer, and you would set your machine, then you would line up this engine with it and put the belt on, then you'd take the fence stretchers and stretch it into the belt and anchor it and shred corn that way.
Okay.
So he actually had a belt-driven machine before he ever had a tractor to drive it with.
Okay. Well, Lynn, thank you very much for telling us
Thank you.
your story and sharing your life.
Yeah.